Hi everyone, Future Rail Productions here. We are at Train Mountain, the world's largest model hobby railroad, and I'm here with Bill Boller of the Flintridge and Portola Valley Railroad. How are you doing today, Bill?
I'm fine, and thanks, Chris, but I'm also from the Portola Valley and Alpine Railroad, which is not to be confused with the Flintridge and Portola Valley.
Right. So that is also a great little railroad. I've heard nothing but good things about it from Bill, so I recommend you guys check it out. So we're here today with Bill to ask him some questions about the Flintridge and Portola Valley, as well as his background in terms of live steam. So I got a list of questions here for you, Bill. Let me get those pulled up here. All right, there we are.
While you pull those up, Chris, I think it'd be only appropriate to give credit to the actual two direct owners and founders of the Flintridge and Portola
Exactly,
Valley.
yeah.
Peter Mosley and Ron Schmidt, who were neighbors. It was their property. It was really their railroad, and we had a fortunate opportunity, the three of us, to get together with respect to building some engines, which I think Chris is going to ask about. But
yeah.
And then I participated in their railroad with them. But it was their railroad, and they deserve the credit for it, as characterized in the movie that Mike Massey made.
Yeah, and that is one of the videos that I grew up on, just watching it over and over again. I think my friends could also attest to that. So, as I recall correctly in the video, you built this engine, the Bumblebee 268.
Well, actually, as a group project, there were several of us. We participated together and built the engines in parallel. And so, yes, this was the engine that I completed, but when I would make parts for this one, I would make multiples of those that could be shared with the others, and so a lot of the parts on here were made by the other folks as well. Right.
And you guys did all the research on it, like you actually took measurements of the real thing and went into all the detail for it?
The group, in fact, did that, especially, again, credit goes to Ron and Peter, who made multiple pilgrimages to the original engines, took multiple boxes of then hard copy photographs, and a lot of dimensioning.
Yeah. Peter and Ron and Bill are a great trio, and you got to give credit to where credit is due. Peter and Ron, great guys. Unfortunately, Ron has now passed away, so. So, Bill, what were you like when you were a kid?
Well, I think the thing that's relevant to where this ended up was that, as far as I was concerned, all things mechanical were always intriguing. And so I played with and took apart and attempted to reassemble everything I could. So it was, it's referred to in that little paradigm, the knack.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You always had that mechanical knack.
I was always intrigued with mechanical things.
Yeah. I think I was the same way, actually, although mine didn't really take off until Thomas the Tank Engine came along into my life. So, what did you want to become when you were a kid? Like, was there any inclination for you to be like a locomotive engineer?
Actually, engineer, yes. Locomotive engineer specifically, no.
Really?
It was pretty clear to me by the time I was ready to think about college that I was going to study mechanical engineering. So mechanical engineering was always something that I wanted to do, and I even had professors in school who, when I was discussing whether or not I really wanted to be an engineer, when I found it out to be, said, if there ever was a mechanical engineer, it's you. So I kind of dripped mechanical engineering, I guess.
Okay, that's awesome. So, what was the spark that got you into the live steam hobby? Like, what was the key ingredient, like the magical moment when you knew you wanted to do this? Yeah.
I actually remember it quite well. It was when Disneyland was a TV show before there was a theme park, and Walt Disney was on TV showing his live steam locomotive, and what was one of the inspirations for the Disneyland theme park was it. I saw a model live steam locomotive that you could get on and ride, and I'll never forget, and I attribute it to Walt.
Yeah, that was also a lot of, there's a guy, I got my engine built by, his name's Aaron, of Millbrook Railroad fame. His inspiration was the Donald Duck cartoon with the trains.
Yep.
Yeah, I love how everyone who is in your generation has that connection to Walt, like just, the Lily Bell. It's just that instant connection to everything trains. I mean, that's probably why I got into the hobby too, outside of Thomas. I mean, there's even a replica Lily Bell running around somewhere. I haven't seen it run yet, but hopefully soon. All right, next question. If you had a time machine, what railroad would you go to see in its golden age, and why?
Well, I would suggest there's more than one answer to that. One that would be really intriguing to me that I know very little about, but I would love to have been there, especially at its origin, is the Central Pacific. Because of its significance, the fact that it came from California, which is where I'm from, the challenge of the Sierras, the technical challenge of the tunneling and the bridges and just even surveying a route through the Sierras to be
Oh yeah, I know. Like, just like you go up there today and you look at some of the old route and it's like, how the hell did they do this?
Exactly. I say I understand how you might do this from a helicopter, but absent being able to get into a helicopter or balloon or a airplane, it's a wonder to me. And when we go to the effort of surveying for our model railroad, it's intriguing even in its own right. But
exactly.
But when you can't see around the corner and there's blind ways in it, and hiking up and down, and then doing it with such incredible accuracy, so you could actually bore a tunnel from both ends and have it meet in the middle.
Yeah.
So I would say the Central Pacific and what it did would be an intriguing part. A second one would be something like the West Side Lumber Company in California, because I really, the first real operational live steam locomotive I had was Shea 15 from that.
Yeah, I remember that. There was a video from Mike, and it was I'm trying to remember. It was Bitter Creek and Western. It was one of those meets. It was 2007, and it had the Magnificent Seven theme. I remember that.
Right, and Shea 14 and Shea 15, and so that would be the second one. And the third one, I'll pick up a broad class, basically characterized by the narrow gauge engine here. Anything that was a precursor to or got absorbed into, let's say, Colorado narrow gauge in general, Denver and Rio Grande, eventually Denver and Rio Grande Western specifically, and so that would include the Rio Grande Southern and the Denver South Park and Pacific and the Florence and Cripple Creek and
right. I would love to see the San Juan extension in its heyday. Just like I actually got to drive the abandoned right of way between Durango and Chama.
Yeah. And
just like being in that gorge and you're just looking up and you see these mountains. Yeah, it's the flattest route possible to Durango, and at the same time there's hardly any water. It's pretty much all desert, and you have to wonder, like, what were they thinking going through this, you know? And like, it made sense though at the time, and I know it's impossible now today, especially how Durango is built up, but I would love to see Chama and Durango connected.
So would I, and in fact I would go just a little further. If you go to San Antonito, you get the full passenger route that was developed to enhance the
oh, so dual gauge from...
Well, the narrow gauge is okay, but from the entire San Juan extension, it was referred to, is exactly what you described. And in fact, I currently have a K36 and some very wonderful cars and things, and basically it is the San Juan train. And that was largely put together by Ron Schmidt. It was he also had the love for that area.
Yeah, it was like, I would love to see it, recreated in full. Like, I know it's pretty much impossible now with Durango, and then you have to talk to the Indian tribes out there about laying track. But the fact that all the infrastructure is still technically there, and with a little bit of work, it could be repaired.
Yes, I didn't realize it. I thought some of it had been compromised by the dam and the lake.
Well, yeah, they rerouted the tracks after they filled the dam and the lake, but most of the original right-of-way is actually a little dirt road that they just literally laid on top of the tracks.
So now you've laid a challenge. I guess I got to go see if I can take that route myself sometime.
Oh yeah, you can. You got to go down to Araboles, and then you take a right, I think that's how you pronounce it, So yeah, you come down the hill, you take a left, and then there's like a right-hand turn.
Yeah.
Turns into a dirt road, but it's still there. And you know, when you first get on it, there's really no sign that the rail grade is there.
Yeah.
But when I traveled it with my friend, we were going along, and I just looked off to my left, and I pointed, and there was just a plain deck girder bridge, like just sitting there off to the side of the road.
Wow.
And then they have there's a section of the railroad with 3 bridges, so like 2 through trusses, and then at the end of the 2 trusses there's a girder bridge. That's still intact.
Yeah. Well, that entire railroad in its development to me would be one that would answer the question that you asked.
Oh yeah, I would love to see that in its heyday. And even like, I think dual gauging, at least from Antonito to Alamosa, is still possible, because the actual infrastructure and the right of way is still there.
Yeah,
you're just missing that 3rd rail.
Well, I thought some of that rail still existed. It's all just the wide gauge between the two? And
yeah, they tore out all the dual gauge and just replaced. Just had the 2 standard rails, and I think they actually disconnected from where the Antonito station for the Cumbres and Toltec is now.
Right. Interesting.
So they do have a little bit of like standard gauge track mixed in, you know, in the yard, but like as kind of a symbol of what it was, but it's not actually connected to the current main line. I know for a time they were doing passenger services from Alamosa down to Antonio, then you could transfer over, but having an actual K36 or K27 with running up that hill, you know, out of Alamosa and then back, you know, out of Antonio and then back down again, that would be awesome.
Yeah, to your point, there wouldn't be as much need for passenger traffic strictly starting and stopping at Chama. So if you really wanted to get the bulk of the passenger traffic, I think, to take advantage of the San Juan Express in its heyday, you would have had to gone on to Antonito or to Alamosa
to get the full experience.
Yeah.
Even doing it today would be awesome.
Yeah. Although that's a more boring section to look at.
Right. All right. So who is your live steam inspiration? Who was the one that like got you started in the hobby? Like, where was your who was your mentor essentially in the hobby?
Okay, that's a little different than the way I thought I understood the question. I was thinking along the lines of those who I admired.
Who's some of them that you admire? Like, and then
even if I didn't meet them. Okay. Well, I started by talking about Walt Disney getting me intrigued in it, and Walt, of course, got his inspiration largely from Ward Kimball and Ollie Johnston, who were both railroad aficionados. Ward had a track and a small locomotive in San Gabriel, California, and both of them got him engaged. And so I would have to say the 3 of them, then Walt and Ward and Ollie, and I didn't have the opportunity to meet or work with any of them, but they clearly had a pronounced impact on me.
Right.
Then moving into the hobby itself, I have great respect and admiration for people like Tom Miller, who's a legend in this hobby, built the K36 that I now have the pleasure of being the custodian of. And the thing that inspires me about Tom is that he really took this hobby to the extreme in terms of the engines he built, a big boy he had built, the railroad that he put together up in Sherwood, Oregon. So he's a sort of a role model. Now added on top of that, we talked about Ron Schmidt, and Ron Schmidt was the quintessential modeler. He was the rivet counter, and he developed a requirement and a respect that we can go through this engine. I can show you some phenomenal things about it that you would otherwise not know, but they are so accurately detailed. Specific engine, specific point in its life, specific things done as it was, and so I got that bug from Ron, and so he was an inspiration.
Okay, we'll definitely have to look into that.
Yeah.
So obviously you told me a little bit about your connection to the project. Which locomotives were modeled?
Well, we started with the idea. We had a drawing for a frame, which actually was a Cook, and there were three of us involved, and two people we haven't mentioned yet, John Grant and Stan Marshall. And so John and Stan and I started to build these locomotives, and the inspiration for it was in fact one of those postcards of the Bumblebee. So it was kind of with that thought it was going. And for a variety of reasons, that project got to the point where we actually had one frame operating on air, and the boilers were partially done and what have you. We were all working busy jobs and trying to, pay for the rent. And the project was never fully completed, and when it came apart, all of the stuff sat in my house for a number of years. And then through my friend Peter Mosley and his next door neighbor, who I did not know at that time, Ron Schmidt, it came down, and I already mentioned that Ron was a narrow gauge nut, just absolutely a Colorado narrow gauge expert who was into HO and O gauge, or O and 3 and Garden Railroad and everything else in the world. And Peter brought him down to my house, and he saw these C16 chassis and what have you, and
fan nerd.
Yeah, it was getting Ron interested was like falling downhill. It was really rather easy. So Stan Marshall re-engaged, and Peter and Ron joined, and so there were four of us, and the intent then was that we would build 4 engines. The original intent was to build 4 engines with 3 of us, and we would sell one to try and recoup some of the cost of the 3 that we've maintained. When we restarted the project with the 4 of us, and each one got an opportunity to select an engine that they were going to do, and so the 3 engines were 268 in 2 versions. This is 268 as it looked in 1955, which was at the end of its life, and it was the last operating C16 on the railroad.
Okay.
Its last activity was to pull up track and ties and take it to the scrapyard. It worked in its last few years along with 278, and it's intriguing to respect the fact that there's only 3 of these engines remaining in the world. It's 268, 278, and 223, and key to their survival, among other things, was the fact that there was a branch that went from Gunnison up to town Baldwin, which is no longer there, which is at Crested Butte. Mm-hmm. And one of the things up there, besides the ranchers and farmers that used the railroad, was a coal mine. And the coal from that mine, listen, they're playing our song. One of the things of value was the coal from that mine, especially during the war years, for a steel mill in Pueblo, Colorado.
Okay.
But since that was a branch line, that I don't know when it was put in, but it was clearly, 1890s vintage, and so it had light rail track and light trestles and bridges and what have you. And to keep that operational through the war and what have you, they couldn't take the big Ks up there because the bridges would fail. So they needed to have some of the smaller engines, and so the 3 engines, 223, 268, 278, were brought back to that area and kept from Gunnison, servicing that route. And that's really caused them to survive the war and therefore survive. So that's why the 3 of those are remaining.
All right, and I'm trying to remember, was one of them involved in a roundhouse fire?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, because I remember reading something about a C16 being in a roundhouse fire and basically getting restored and brought back because it was like the only one that it was not so badly damaged.
Well, then it's quite possible, because what happened was, if you remember, in fact, Walt Disney was with Ward Kimball, went to this event in 1949. There was a rail fair, in Chicago, and the DNRGW was still painting its engines in then the green colors, the green coaches, and the black engines. And to reintroduce or to rebrand DNRGW, they came up with the new paint scheme, including this Grande Gold or Aspen Gold, some people refer to it as. And that color was chosen in 1949, and it was introduced to the world by taking an engine and making it look like one of their original engines. That engine had a name on it, and it was a wood-burning engine with a big diamond stack. It had a big kerosene lamp on it, a long wooden pilot, and what it was an 1880s version.
Right.
So they wanted to have one of their original engines there. They didn't have the original engine, but they had this engine, 268, that was built in 1882 as one of the first 20 that they bought in that time. And so they said, we'll make it look like that, and we'll characterize it, and we'll paint it up with the change scheme. So it's the gold and the black and the silver underneath, and they loaded it on a flat car and sent it to Chicago. And it ran at rail fair in that color scheme. I don't know whether Walt Disney ever rode on it or not, but I know he went to that rail fair, and so he obviously saw this and presumably may have ridden on it. When it came back from rail fair, it was donated to the city of Denver.
Okay.
And 278 and 223, I believe at that time, still serviced the Baldwin branch that we talked about. And eventually 223, then I don't know why it stopped, but 278 was the lone engine still servicing the Baldwin branch, and it required some rework. Now, whether that was associated with that fire or something, I don't know, but what I do know is that the railroad went to Denver and reclaimed 268 and put it in service on the Baldwin branch in this color scheme. So that's why it was back in service, and it served there with 278 for a while. 278 was eventually retired, and then this was the last engine that ran until 1955. Now that gave us two opportunities. So your original question was, what engines did we build and why? Well, 268 sits in Gunnison today, and so you can access it, and to the degree that it's the parts are still there and what have you, take measurements and what have you, and I can talk about this flanger in a minute and how important it was to have the engine there, because this flanger's long since been gone.
Yeah, I for whatever reason, I thought this was a bell.
Well, we'll talk about that, and it's coincidental that comes up because it operates a flanger under here, which is never on this locomotive for another reason, but this trip, for whatever reason, I put the flanger in because people always look at this, railroaders look at this and they say, what is that? So I'll come back to that in a minute, and I'll finish what you're answering your question. 268 then was one. 278 still exists. Of course, it's on the bridge in Cimarron,
Yep.
and accessible. And so that was an obvious choice as well because it could be documented.
Right.
And so the three engines that were chosen by Peter, Ron, and I were two different versions of 268. So I ended up with the Bumblebee,
Right.
1955 version. Peter modeled it as it looked in the 1930s when it was used as a switch engine in Durango. And so there's some differences. His pilot is different, and of course they've got footboards that are designed for the people to be getting off and on frequently, and a number of other things are different. The plumbing's different and what have you. So those differences are characterized in the two engines that we modeled, and Ron did 278.
Right.
So those were three of the four. The fourth one, Stan Marshall respected the fact that it actually was a Cook frame, and there were a few Cooks C-16s built for the DNR GW, and he really, there's none of those have survived, and he wanted to model that.
So the actual 268, 278, and 223, they weren't Cook engines.
Correct. Those were Baldwin locomotives.
Okay.
So the four engines originally included two of 268, two vintages, 278, and the fourth one was this 1890s version of a Cook engine.
Okay.
And then subsequent to that, after ours were running, Jimmy Booth picked up we became close friends, and we agreed to help him, and he's as fanatical as Ron, and is very, 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 very detail oriented, has a long history of the railroad, DNR, GW, and the narrow gauge in particular. And so he chose 223 because it was the remaining one which we didn't choose that still exists.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because see, for me, my thinking was like, okay, well, obviously, yeah, the C-16 project happened, and then I watched the Mike Massey video on the production,
Right.
and you mentioned that there were four engines, but then like and then the line is Stan Marshall got elderly and had to back out of the project. But my thinking was, well, if the fourth engine was technically a C16, as described in the documentary. Where did it go, and what was the original plan for it? But you're telling me that it was going to be a Cook engine. Stan respected that fact. It was never intended or designed to be 223.
It was never going to be a DNR GW. The three of them were, and that was going to be a standalone version itself. And then 223 came and appeared later, and so that's the fourth legitimate, Colorado narrow gauge locomotive. And so you can confuse the original four with the final four, but they're different by that one. So there's actually 5 total.
Okay, 5 total engines. And so you have obviously 268, 278, the black 268. You have 223.
Yes.
And then you have Stan's Cook.
Correct.
Okay, wow, that is very, very tough to remember. Oh wow, that's a lot to get used to. All right, are there any funny or interesting stories from the hobby?
I don't know of any really funny stories that'd be worth sharing. The intriguing things I love about this hobby is the opportunities to do things or redo things mechanical or literally infinite. I consider the target-rich environment. The one thing that I think is particularly interesting is that I kind of laugh because someone quipped about the fact that those of us that work in this project have a multiplicity of highly technical degrees from prestigious universities, et cetera, and someone commented one time, "Oh my gosh, look at all this formal education, brain power going to do this." And I chuckle and say, we are trying as hard as we can to replicate what some people did 150 years ago, and we are not being as successful as they were. You gain a tremendous respect for all of the things that were done at the time.
Right.
And,
so I just noticed you're slightly off camera a little bit.
Oh.
I'm more in the shot.
All right.
Yep.
Well, that's to their benefit. I'll come over here and ruin the screen.
So, yeah, do you have any funny memories with Peter and Ron? Like, just is there like something like you were was there anything like you were working on the engine and then you were trying to find something and then you were like looking it up or something and then you had that aha moment like, oh God, I'm so dumb, and then it just ended in a laughing fit?
Actually, no. I mean, the interactions were really quite positive. Our skills complement each other very well, and when one of us would have a blind spot, the other person would usually have it, and it worked out quite well. But I don't recollect any that ended up in great frivolity or hilarious
or just like
stupidity.
Oh man. You're like, all right. So, what was the Flintridge and Portola Valley Railroad like in its heyday? Why did it finally close, and where did the engines and rolling stock end up?
Yeah, well, the FNPV, the name recognized that Peter's father, Francis Mosley, was very well respected in this hobby. In fact, he would be on that list of people that I would admire. He, a very, very skilled individual who provided the working dynamos to the hobby, an 1 inch scale originally, and then 1.5 inch. And the story, as I understand it, was that he was one of those people that was told you can't do that because the back EMF physics forces preclude you from doing the coils that you need in that size and scale and what have you. And he refused to believe that and just took on the challenge and built them. And my understanding again is that he basically said that everyone that he packed and sold to the hobby had a $100 bill of his in it because he wasn't making money on it. But he had an attitude, he was famous for it, about making contributions to this hobby and helping other people. So phenomenal.
And I love that because like that's kind of spirit is still here at Train Mountain. Like this place would not run without volunteers, 100%.
Yeah. So let's see what started me on this path. You'd asked the question.
Yeah, we were on
the FPV and what
was it like in its heyday? Yeah,
in its heyday. So The railroad was Peter and Ron's, who were very generous in sharing their knowledge and their interest, and Peter following in his father's footsteps by trying to help as many people as he could get engaged in it. So it was a very enjoyable place to go, but it was on private property, and you had consideration for neighbors when you would run and
Right.
those kinds of things. And building the railroad was as much fun as operating on it, and it was important to be accurate as well.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful place, and I started to say that the name of it, the Flintridge and Portola Valley, came from Flintridge, which is in Pasadena,
Okay.
400 miles away, and that was his father, Francis Mosley's railroad. That's how I got up on that tangent. And so Peter said this is kind of the northern division, if you will, of the Flintridge and the continuation. That's how that came about. And unfortunately, Ron developed Parkinson's disease, and it gradually made it more and more difficult for him. And so he eventually not only had to be very passive in the hobby, but eventually he chose to buy another house and move to a house that was one level because he needed the access. And so without Ron in the hobby and in the local railroad, that changed the flavor of it quite a bit. And Peter had been in and out of the hobby for quite a number of years, and he had a strong interest, and his wife had a very strong interest in living in the Pacific Northwest. And so the time came when their personal goals were satisfied on moving to the Pacific Northwest, and so all of the property was up for sale. And as in the case with Tom Miller, it's not readily a huge market for people that want to come in and buy a property with a railroad. And in this case, it would mean this particular railroad crossed 3 parcels in Portola Valley, California.
Peter's house, Ron's house, and then Ron's second house.
And Ron's second house, because he needed it for the space to turn it around. And this is, unfortunately, let's say it's not really the low rent district of the world. Right down the hill is Sand Hill Road, which is the venture capital, of the headquarters of the world,
right
behind Stanford University, and the property is sufficiently expensive that very few people come in and buy 2 and 3 parcels, especially for the purpose of maintaining a railroad.
Right.
So that caused it to come to an end. Now, I did mention the Portola Valley and Alpine because that occurred largely in parallel, and that was a railroad started by my good friend Jacques Littlefield and me. I proposed to him developing a railroad, and it was at the very time before I got in the narrow gauge, when I first got into the hobby. I had a bunch of friends that were going to do railroading, did railroading. They were already there. I was joining the group that knew how to do this that I didn't know, and they didn't have a track. And on my left hand was a good friend that I had met at work. Actually, he was hired and worked for me at the company that I worked for at the time, and he had several hundred acres in the hills, just where we just were talking about behind. So getting the logic, and he also had a incredible interest and desire in all things mechanical, and subsequently actually put together the world's largest private collection of armored fighting vehicles,
Wow.
according to Guinness Book of World Records. So this was the Military Vehicle Technology Foundation, and he had hundreds of tanks and the things you'd consider as tanks on his property, but he had a big enough piece of property that I'm looking at these guys that are into trains, this guy that's into mechanical stuff, he's got land.
He's got a tank.
You got it. And so again, that was another one of these like falling downhill events, putting them together. And so we established in 1979 the Portola Valley and Alpine Railroad, which has continued and has expanded substantially since then.
Right, okay.
Just to add to the final part of your question then, there was a logical connection for a way to salvage some of the stuff from the F&TV, and some of it has moved. A lot of the rolling stock and things have gone to the PV&A, a lot of it to private people that Ron has made donations to or made donations to. And basically the track was pulled up and donated, and then the bridge was copied a couple of different places, and some of the outbuildings and things and all that. And we actually took Ron's engine house from his property, cut it in half so we could move it, and moved it up to PV&A and broke it in two and added a big intersection. And there's a Ron Schmidt car barn up there with 150 feet of track in it.
So it's still, so the engine house is still there?
Well, this car barn, if you will, is still there, and it is full of 150 feet of Ron's rolling stock.
Wow.
So
that is awesome. I really need to make the trip over there sometime. I wish I had the time. That is awesome. And so obviously 268 stayed with you.
yes.
278 was sold to whom?
It was given to Ray Barham by Ron,
Okay.
and I was pleased to help facilitate that. Unbeknownst to Ron, Ray has been a 278 fan since forever. He grew up like us, coveting that engine. Actually tried to contract to get one made for himself a number of years earlier, and it never panned out. And I discovered that in a conversation with Ray, and knew about the graciousness of Ron, and I went to Ron and said, I've got the perfect home for 278 if you're willing, and it happened from there.
And Black 268, where did she end up?
Peter sold it to Frank Fine in California.
Okay. And she's still around running?
Yes. Frank has a railroad at his house, a very nice railroad at his house, and he runs it there frequently.
And then what about, was it a K36 that Peter owned?
Well, that was Ron's. It was K27.
Oh, K27. I say, where did the K27 end up?
Yeah. So Ron had the K27, and he gave that to Peter. And Peter by then had moved to out of the state.
So he's still up in the Pacific Northwest?
He's in the Pacific Northwest. And subsequently then he gave that engine to Jimmy Booth.
Okay.
And Jimmy is here, and 464
There's that
here.
one right there,
Yep.
yeah. That's awesome.
And so you can see if that was built by Richard Hewlin for Ron.
That's awesome. So if you want to be technical, at least 3/5 of the actual fleet is here.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah.
Yeah, 3/5 of the fleet's here. That's awesome. What would you say to those who are just getting started in the hobby? Any advice?
Well, obviously, everybody could use some hand-holding. There's two things. The good news is if you find a group or an individual, and as you've mentioned, Chris, the people that typically are in this hobby are more than willing to share because they recognize that it was through the sharing that allowed them to be successful. Getting with a formal group that has a club or something is a great place to start. Now, there's a two-edged sword there I want to mention is going to kind of tie back to the earlier comments. There's a lot of what I would refer to as old wives' tales and some things that have deviated from best practice over the years by well-intentioned people who did not have the opportunity or respect the reason some of the decisions have been made on design parameters. And of course the physics that go with this are compounded by the fact that linear dimensions scale linearly and surface dimensions scale as the square root, and volumetric dimensions and weights and certain things depend are volumetric, but looking at things visually is linear. And an example would be if you build a bridge as an engineer to hold this weight, you'd be very disappointed in looking at it because your mind tells you that an engine that's this big needs a bridge that's about this big because
Right.
That's a linear thing, and the amount of steel and the weight and everything in that bridge then is substantially more than is required by the structure. So we build the things that are the best for the hobby based on the linear dimensioning and the visual appearance rather than the structural appearance. but the strength typically works in our favor. Most of the things related to this, as they scale down, become stronger. Not all things work that way, but so if you could connect with somebody who has this knowledge and skill set and can hold your hand, there's nothing that can be better than that. But you also can find numerous opportunities to contribute, to rethink things and say, so why is it that you do it that way? And in many cases you'll find out, there was in fact a better way that got lost.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
What would you like to be remembered about?
Good question. Couple things perhaps. Let me just start with the one that you mentioned originally, which is to participate in this hobby and to benefit from it and the things you get out of it. I'd like to be remembered like Francis Mosley and people like that gave back to the hobby. I'd like people to think that there was a inflection point in the curve. This is pre my existence, this is post my existence, and I helped turn that corner and make things better.